Welcome to the AtlantECO podcast, where we talk about the science behind the AtlantECO project, the Atlantic Ocean, and the human adventures experienced along the way. Here, we have conversations with guests from around the world who work together so that we can better understand, manage, and protect the ocean. So let's embark on the journey of AtlantECO and discover the world that lies above and beneath the surface of the beautiful Atlantic Ocean. Welcome back to the AtlantECO podcast. And in today's episode, we are discovering another research and innovation project, one of the many that work on advancing the science and technologies and contribute to the advancement of marine sciences and its applications, so that together we improve our understanding, management, and protection of the oceans. And we're here to talk about the Marco Bolo project with our guest today, Nicolas Pade, who is the coordinator of this project funded under the European Union's Horizon Europe, which is a research and innovation program from the European Commission. So hi, Nick, and welcome to the AtlantECO podcast.
Hi, Louise. Thank you for inviting me here today.
So you might not know, but I like to start the podcast that way. I'd like to get to know you a little bit more. And to start our conversation, can you tell me about your connection to the oceans, how it started, how it evolved, and how it has been for you up to now and what you're doing at the moment?
Well, I think it's probably a bit of a stereotypical answer to that one. Actually, the marine environment is something that was always really fascinating to me. I'm half Danish, so I grew up at the sea, 300-400 meters from the sea. So we were always on the beach and always going in the water. And very early on, I started getting very interested in, well, of course, all the charismatic megafauna of dolphins and rays and seals and so on. So that's very much how I really got into it. People always say, oh yeah, I wanted to be a marine biologist since I was a kid. That's actually true. I mean, it was an idea that came into my head quite early on and sort of always stayed there. The real sort of passion and interest came more into my teenage years when I really got into snorkeling and diving, and then really just every summer just spending as much time as possible underwater. And I've always been a nature lover and always been an outdoor person, so it's the fascination of nature and life is also what wanted me to be a scientist, to understand more on what happens in the environment. And I wasn't somebody who did particularly well at school, but then when I went to university, I did super well. I got to spend 4 years just doing things that I loved. And so that was super exciting, just learning about all these things. So that's how the sort of the passion got into it. The interest in megafauna always stayed there as well. And that also was very much the direction that my research went into. So I'm an ecologist by background. And what I was always very interested in is, where do animals go and why? How do they make their decisions? And one thing that struck me very early on in research was this, very simplistic view that we have of particularly marine life, cold-blooded fish that don't feel pain. They just swim back and forth. And no, these animals are way more complex. Even jellyfish are complex in where they go, and they don't just go with the currents. And realizing that animals are making decisions and making choices and so on was actually hugely exciting. And I remember getting one of my first satellite tagging profiles from a porbeagle shark we tracked off the coast of southwest England. And just seeing this track and thinking, this is what a shark did for 3 months at a rate of every 5 seconds. So this is exactly what this animal did. And it's just trying to figure out and interpret all these things. I find absolutely fascinating, and I still do. I guess this is why I'm also still working in the marine sciences, even though I've now moved away from the active research and gone much more into the coordination of things. I'm the director of research infrastructure, but that sort of combines another part of what I love about research, which is all the international side. I love the collaboration. I love the sharing solutions and finding ways to deal with problems and working together and bringing the best people with different expertise together to solve problems. I think it's super exciting, and it's always nice to meet people from other places and see what they do and taste their wine and eat their food. I love that side of it as well. So, but I guess that's part of being an expat as well. So yeah, that's very much how I sort of got into marine biology and the connection I have to that.
Yeah, I mean, the community is one item that comes so often when I talk to people, saying that this community is such a nice community to involve within.
Yeah. But you're right, the people is such a pleasure. And, there's been times where you go, yeah, maybe it's time to do something else and move away. And then it's actually the people that end up making me stay, because these are great people. They're colleagues that have been colleagues for 10 years now. And I used to joke about that none of my colleagues were in my office because they were everywhere else. And now that's true. They're spread all over Europe and sometimes outside of Europe. Yeah. So it's a great way of working.
And talking about bringing a community together to address some challenges, let's turn to your project. If we can start by setting the scene, it would be good to understand more about the actual context and the specific challenges within which you are implementing your project. So Marco Bolo, can you tell us what the needs behind the project are?
Yeah, with pleasure. So Marco Bolo came for me out of a need to really massively improve the way that we're gathering information around the sea. We talk all the time about the ocean, but I think we far too often neglect the life component in there. Of course, and a really important part of marine biology or ocean science in general, is observation. And observation in ocean science very often tends to mean physics and chemistry. So marine observation is dominated by remote sensing, research vessels, technological sensors, and so on. And it's very well structured. And it's amazing what they managed to do over the past 50 years of creating a fantastic, rigid system that scientifically is really robust and is capable of answering some very complex questions and supporting now things like weather forecasting, shipping, and so on. This, I think, is one of the amazing outcomes we can have from science. It's not just learning about it, but also figuring out how we can use it to our advantage and ultimately being able to live in a way that is sustainable and not impacting too much on our planet. But for me, it was always blaringly obvious that the biological component is massively lacking. And unfortunately, in the last 20, 30 years, we've lost a lot of long-term time series in biology because it's just not been that exciting to fund. And it's a terrible reason. There's so much good science that ultimately is based on good observation and long-term time series, but they're not easy or cheap to collect. Yeah. And I feel that we now in biology have just a little bit lost this observation habit of sticking to a rigid protocol, not changing it every time there's a new technology. You can bolt on, but not change. And so for me, Marco Bolo is trying to deal with this topic and creating a very strong base to build biological observation in a very open way. We're trying to propose a solution to the problem and saying, we need this. Here are the principles that the community is saying we should do. This is what's being said in publications. We need standards. We need better metadata. We need data repositories. We need ability to monitor. We need integration of this. We need to work with the oceanographers. That's essentially the need that we need to have, is we need to get on board with the oceanographers to say, okay, we can be as disciplined and as rigorous as you are around a topic that is as complex as biology. And this is what we can contribute. And of course, it's not up to the oceanographers to do this. They've done their bit. This is for us to do. And so that's the first part of the context, is to really try and build that strong biological observation base. But I think good observation has to respond to science. It has to provide the data that's necessary to try and understand the system. But it also needs to have data that is useful for other stakeholders. We have now, of course, the mantra from the European Commission, which is, collect data once and use many times. And I believe in this very strongly. It's hugely expensive to collect all this information. We can't be naive about that. So it has to be useful. But in order for it to be useful, we need to know what our stakeholders want. And that's the other major challenge. It's so difficult to find out from decision makers and policymakers what they want. What do they want to know? It's clear that their understanding of biology is limited. And that is our job, to explain to them, to give them the right information. But if they can't tell us what they need, then how are we supposed to provide the right thing? In science, for so many years now, we produce toolkits and data analytical software and so on that we believe is relevant and important to help them make their decisions. But we don't see any of it really being used or taken up. So there's only two answers, I think. It's either they're not aware it's there or it's not the right thing. And we can keep inventing things, hoping eventually we get lucky and stick to it. Or we can then push to create this dialogue with our decision makers. And that's the other big challenge that we're trying to respond to here, is to really bring science much closer to policy and decision making. So we're not just pushing science towards innovation, new tools, and profit. We're also pushing science towards good decision making and trying to make a real change in the way we do things.
Yeah, something that is relevant. So understanding the need, but educating at the same time those users so that they can tell you what they need.
Exactly. I think one of the things that was really a trigger point for me in wanting to make this project was a report that came out from Medin in the UK, which was also supported by the OECD, where they did an analysis of who is using long-term time series and marine observation data. And it was, for me, quite a shocking result. So about 50% of the use is from researchers. That's not shocking. That's to be expected. But that 17% only is being used by decision makers and so on. For me, that's shocking. This is data that's costing hundreds of millions of euros to produce, and the people paying for it aren't using it. So they're either producing the wrong data, or they aren't even aware of what the data is doing. And so there, the dialogue is needed as well, is to say, okay, well, we're doing this is great for us, but is it responding to your needs? And if not, what adjustments do we need to make it relevant for you as well? I have no doubt that we will always be able to make data collection relevant for science. I have no doubt about that. We should be able to also have other people use it effectively.
Yeah, we are trying to implement changes. We're trying to make an impact there. So it needs to get in the hands of the right people, but in the way that they can use it. So now that we know those challenges, we understand a little bit more about that context and those needs. Can you explain how the project more specifically is contributing to addressing these issues?
So we're trying to achieve this with three components, if you want. The first component is around the data, because I believe that the data is one of the best ways to make things interoperable and comparable. If we want to make sure that we have a system that is functionable and that's comparable, and between countries, between continents, between ocean basins, we need to agree on some standards. And of course, to do that around the data, I think, is the best way. It's also a matter of making sure that data is open and data is accessible. So the first part, if you want, is to try and make sure that we're implementing a very, very high level of data interoperability. So we talk a lot about FAIR data, so findable, interoperable, accessible, reproducible. But there's some very nice open science standards that have also been set by, for example, IOC, UNESCO, IODE, and so on, that we're trying to implement to really make it as open as possible. That's the first part of the data component. The second part of the data component is to try and take the data that we're currently producing in biological observation and try to apply it in different manners. And we're trying to apply that around the frameworks that we believe are relevant in decision making. So from a European perspective, we're taking that data and saying, okay, we have imaging data, we have eDNA data, we have satellite data, all these sorts of things. What of that data can we use to inform the MSFD and WFD indicators that we have in Europe? So the Water Framework Directive and the Marine Strategic Framework Directives. These indicators are supposed to show the health of our environment in Europe. So this data, which is normally done by environment agencies all over Europe every few years, well, what if the data we were collecting on a monthly or bi-monthly basis could inform that? We didn't have to wait 5 years. We could have this every 2 months, every 6 months, once a year, whichever, if it responds to the needs of those indicators. So that's the first challenge. The second challenge is to do that, but with the essential variables. So of the essential ocean variables and the essential biological variables, we're taking those. Of course, we can't do all of them. So we are cherry picking the ones, both for MSFD, WFD, and for the essential variables.
Yeah.
We're cherry picking where we think the data can contribute. And where we think it can contribute, we will then try to make pipelines and descriptors for how to use that data in a way that's acceptable to describe that indicator. And we will do that with the Goose BioEco panel. So the people that have agreed on setting these, we will get them to rubber stamp what we say and say, okay, this is the way that you produce this essential ocean variable. This will also then help other people to say, okay, well, we want to contribute to this framework. These guys says that it can be done this way, and the BioEco panel agrees.
Right.
So essentially, we have a mantra of absolutely openness for everything we do in Marco Bolo. The data we use is open access data. The data we produce will be open access data. Every protocol and so on we do is published, openly available, everything. Because the idea here is to create a stable, strong platform to build observation. The second component is to really work on the data collection. So looking at the imaging, the eDNA and so on, is to make the protocols robust. In some of the techniques like eDNA is to make some comparisons and meta-analysis with traditional data sets to demonstrate, particularly to environment agencies and so on, that this data is robust, it's trustable, you don't have to worry about it. It is really, really good data. It will answer the questions that you need, plus a lot more. And so hopefully we can break down that barrier of mistrust towards new technologies and new techniques that really could help there. Then we also have within the observation component, looking at how we can get different sensors to talk to each other in terms of creating sort of an advanced or a modern biological observatory, where you will have autonomous vehicles that are mapping ocean floor whilst they're also taking images or collecting eDNA, and in some cases producing biodiversity maps on the go or in post-processing. It might sound trivial, but actually getting all these different sensors and vehicles to talk to each other isn't. But there's been a number of previous really, really good European projects like Take Oceans that we are now working with to say, okay, well, you have that technology, well, let's try and make it work. And then ultimately, again, apply that data. The data then produced from these different platforms will then be also fed into modeling and product creation to say, okay, well, with the data that we create, what new knowledge can we create in terms of modeling and combining? So I think there we're covering quite a broad palette in terms of saying these are the technologies we can integrate. At the end of project, we will have a good practice handbook of saying, okay, well, this is how you implement X, Y, Z. This is how you get these sensors to talk to each other. You can use this software or modeling tool to do so on and so forth. So this will hopefully also then help the observing community to create this. And then the last component is then the engagement with the stakeholders. So there we are working also with social scientists to do two things. The first thing we're doing, which is we're doing now, is we're profiling users. So we have sent out questionnaires to try and target environment agencies, researchers, policymakers, and so on to find out what's their relationship to the data, what are their barriers to use, what are their interests, what are their needs, and so on. And there, then we will hopefully, in the first instance, be able to understand the people that are interested in the first place. And they're really happy. We've had over 500 responses now to this questionnaire from all over the world. We had actually a ridiculously good response from the United States. So this just goes to show how these networks work. And AtlantECO was actually fundamental in making this link to getting responses in Latin America and South Africa and so on. So this just shows how important these networks are. And then we're building a community of practice where we are then getting the people who are producing the data and the people who should be or could be using the data to come together a couple of times a year to discuss what are the barriers, what can we do, what are our capabilities today, do these match your needs? Okay, if they do, then we continue working on them. And the year after, we report back and say, where are we now? Is this the right thing? Is it going in the right direction? To try and get this continuous dialogue going. So we'll see how it goes. We have got, and that component is going very well. We're now collaborating also with a project called Biodiversity Plus, which is bringing together a lot of environment agencies as well as funding agencies to speak to them directly as well to understand what their needs are. They're looking for what new technologies they can implement, what networks of observation already exist. So we've already been able to link to a number of important projects. I'm really pleased about that. But definitely the last part is definitely the most challenging bit. We have a number of big stakeholder events planned every year to showcase where we are and what we can do. We'll, of course, tie that together with some of the UN decade conferences and so on. But we'll also be using these stakeholder events to invite colleagues from the United States, colleagues from the various UN Ocean Decade programs that we're involved in, like Marine Life 2030 and OBON. So we can also bring people outside of Europe, because what we don't want to do in Marco Bolo is just create another European thing. We want to make sure that Europe is contributing to something global, that what we're doing is useful for everyone else, and that what we're doing could be used by someone else. And if somebody else has a good idea, that we can bring it in and use it in Europe as well. So we don't want to build something that's just built for our needs, something that is really open and international.
Yeah, I mean, in the end, the ocean is everywhere and everybody benefits from its resources, its services, everything.
Exactly.
So we should all share our tools and resources to look after it and manage it better. But I understand the challenge that exists, I think, in every single project that is done by a lot of researchers in the end. Making that link between the research and the users is one of the most challenging aspects that we're all
Absolutely.
facing. For sure.
And I think, but we also have to be completely unapologetic, get the gloves off, and then really just try and encourage the engagement of anyone we can. We've had to really like to give a lot of credit to our project officer here as well from the company that manages the Horizons project. She's been amazing in opening doors, in bringing people in from various DGs in the commission to attend meetings. And, and we have to really do everything we can and use all these channels. When people are willing to help, we have to try it and be realistic. I mean, if we can convince one DG, but not three, well, then that's one that we didn't have before. So we have to really accept every little success that we have and just build on it. But I think we're now also in a time where people want to listen. I mean, politicians know there's a problem and they know that there's an expectation from their constituents to do something about it. And I think to an extent, part of the reason why we're slow to do it is that it's not easy and the answers aren't easy. It's not just a lack of willingness. It's not clear what the right thing is to do. The only thing that's clear is that the status quo is not acceptable, and breaking the status quo is very hard.
Yeah. Do we take a left or do we take a right? Well, could go well that way for these things, but then if you go that way, it would be better for those things. So no, not an easy position to be in for sure. So you started talking about the activities that you've undertaken in the last, you've been running for, was it end of 2022 you started?
Yeah, December 22.
So I guess it's still very early phases. Those massive projects, they take a long time to get going and to get their momentum. So you're still there in the early phases, but you mentioned the survey, and what else is going on at the moment?
So the stakeholder component is the big thing. It's the part that started up really, really quickly. And so that's actually going pretty well. And it's been a real joy. This is my first project really as a coordinator working with social scientists, which has been really cool. I'm really interested in what they do. It's such an interesting approach that's very different from what we do. So I've really been enjoying that. And we've had good response so far. So that's been encouraging. What else has been going on is, so new to the European projects is, of course, the really strong encouragement to collaborate with other projects. So actually a fair amount of energy has been going into this, in trying to coordinate with other projects about what can we do together, where are we going to be stepping on each other's feet, and what are you doing that I can integrate. And this takes a crazy amount of time, actually, because we've decided the way we want to go. And so talking to the project says, but I think green is better than blue. This is why we're not doing the project together, It doesn't mean that project is wrong, though. And part of the challenge as well with marine observation is that there isn't a right or a wrong way. There's a million ways of doing it. Ultimately, it comes down to what are the questions you need answers to. What's your context? Is it fisheries that's important? Is it agriculture that's important? Is there a cultural component that's important? All these things are relevant and dictate what you're measuring and why. So I think most of the approaches have their way. And this is also why in Marco Bolo, we're not trying to propose an alpha omega. If anything, we're trying to propose a minimum standard, a minimum layer of data of information that can be used very broadly, depending on your answers. But of course, it's not going to drill down into every protein that's being developed and so on. Other people are interested in that, and they can produce that in the relevant context. But there is a minimum amount of coordination that needs to be put in place and standardization that we need to have. We've spent a lot of time on the data. We've put out our data management plan, was finished a little while ago, and it's a very, very ambitious one. Also because we've tried to create one that we think is a best practice, or a very good practice, at least, trying to integrate all the open science elements. So this is actually something that we'll be pushing out quite soon. Probably we'll publish it to Zenodo, and encourage very strongly anyone who wants to use it to pick it up. On the Horizons project or for their organizations or whatever. It's very strongly oriented around how do you open your data up? How do you make it publicly available? How is it findable? Good metadata, all these things. So we try to really combine all of the right things there. So I'm really, really pleased. And the initial feedback we've had has been really good as well. The science components, as you say, these things take time to get going. So there's a lot of collection of data going on, deciding what the right data sets are. And of course, as well, I mean, it's not just in other sectors, science is having its recruitment problems too.
Yeah.
It's actually, like we chatted about before we started the podcast, everybody is trying to hire postdocs at the moment and project managers, and there's a finite pool. I don't know any project at the moment that isn't recruiting. So anyone listening to the podcast who's interested in a job in a European project around marine science, well, check out the websites, because there's always open positions. So this has been going quite well, but yeah, as I said, it's taken quite a lot of time to get the coordination going. But there's some interesting stuff in the pipeline, particularly around trying to agree on definitions around biodiversity. When we talk about biodiversity, what do we mean? We talk about functional diversity and so on. And these seem trivial questions, but they dictate the sort of solutions we propose. So this is something that amongst projects we want to sit down and have a good chat discussion about. We might come to different conclusions, say, well, this project, this is what we mean by biodiversity, but at least we've agreed on a number of definitions so we can be specific about what we propose, and that the people for who this is relevant understand as well that this one will focus on simplifying things now, on saving turtles. This will, prioritize oxygen production or carbon storage, so that people really understand the differences. So that's where we are at the moment. So sometimes things go frustratingly slowly, but it's a process that's necessary to get things going. And as you know very well, from year 2, 3, things start to really pick up and go really fast. It's the calm before the storm still.
Yeah, talking about the storm, so you still have another 3 years to go. So if we focus on just the next year, what are the main things you're looking forward to?
So this community of practice I was talking about, we will have the first meeting coming up very soon. So this is something I'm really looking forward to, because so much of this hinges on it and it working and people being invested. So I'm really looking forward to see how well this will work. I mean, to be completely honest and transparent, we've already started working on contingency plans in case we don't get the engagement we want, because otherwise we can't have the project hinge on fail on this community of practices. Not the first time this has been tried. I mean, community of practice isn't reinventing anything. So what I'm excited about is the people that we are getting involved, which are very diverse, and some people that I haven't had the pleasure to work with before from environment agencies and so on. So I think the perspectives will be really, really interesting. And I think that's also a reality, though. This is going to make the process of implementation longer, because it takes time to understand what people need and for us to get to know each other and understand our jargon and limitations. But this is something I'm really excited about. And so also in terms of the next year, I mean, a year from now, we should have had our first major stakeholder event. I'm really excited to see how this goes, because we can do so many exciting things in marine science already. And I'm really looking forward to be able to say, hey, look what we can do today already. Despite all the knowledge gaps, despite the lack of understanding and the problems of coordination and funding and so on, we can do all this awesome stuff already. So how do we, make this work and implement it quickly so we can actually start getting towards some solutions? So this is very excited about that. There's some huge challenges. I mean, adapting the data to the different indicators is going to be a massive challenge. Very easy to write a nice proposal around it, but this is a huge challenge, and it's going to be very difficult. And to be quite honest, I mean, I am not expecting that we will be measuring the number of indicators we can respond to in the dozens. If at the end of the project we have a dozen indicators that we can reliably respond to, very well described, and to the point where we could probably write a workflow to produce the indicator data, I'll be very pleased.
I think I want to end our conversation today directing the people that want to know more about the project, and especially if they want to apply for any of the jobs that you have going on and join the exciting opportunities, then where do they get in touch with you?
Yeah, so there's, of course, the usual webpage for the Marco Bolo project. We also have all the positions that we'll be hiring at EMBRC, so the organization which is coordinating the project. But for all the other positions, particularly the postdoc positions, will be on our website. And otherwise, there's no problem in dropping us an email if something isn't clear. If you go onto the website, you're presented straight away with an option to signing up to a newsletter. So that's another way of staying in touch. And then, of course, following us on the various social media. So we have a number of quite exciting things prepared, I think, to put out, including various fact sheets about what we can and can't do at this point, how the project's progressing. We'll be making a number of animated videos as well as the project progresses to demonstrate the new technology and so on, because we think people will be really interested. So it'll be, of course, educational on one side, but hopefully also just a bit of, wow, yeah, there's some cool tech. We can do some
cool
stuff.
Project.
So
maybe get somebody interested to come and join the adventure, which is
definitely.
Yeah. So we'll do our best to relay all of that information, make all the links available anyway as we put this episode out, and as I said, we keep working together in this amazing community.
Yeah, that's amazing. That'd be great. Thank you very much, Idris.
Thank you for your time today, Nick, and keep in touch.
Will do. It was my pleasure.
We hope that you've enjoyed today's episode and look forward to seeing you next time. You can follow the AtlantECO project on our website on www.AtlantECO.eu, and you can also find us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. All the links and information on the project and on today's episode is in the show notes. AtlantECO is a project funded under Horizon 2020, a European Union research and innovation programme.